Yeah, and also I can't see you when I have my slides up, so just keep that in mind.
Okay. All right, well, I think we can get started.
Yeah, we'll be sure to make goofy faces the whole time while you're talking.
I'll catch it on the recording later.
Yeah. Awesome. So we are hosting Mark Kilby. So we're really happy to have Mark join us today because we hear through the grapevine that this is the last talk he's going to be doing in a while. So we feel so honored to have him here. So we also have a sponsor, ScrumDo, which we're really happy to announce. So we went through some things about ScrumDo last time. But if you ever have a question, ScrumDo, go to scrumdo.com. It's really an amazing Agile tool. They even have things like team happiness, and it actually supports some enterprise Kanban and Scrum boards. So something to check out. They have a free trial, I think, for 30 days. So look, our co-hosts keep growing. We've added on not only Lori recently, but Mark Kruth. Yay. Hi, Mark. So yeah, who are we? We're just a group of volunteers who come together to continue growing in our Agile journey and helping others. We're not getting anything from it. We just want to give back, and we want to live our journey to the fullest and keep learning. And we are always in search of topics to help guide the development. And so, yeah, if you know of anybody who's interested in doing a talk, or you're interested yourself in doing a talk, then reach out to us. We'll have some information forthcoming. So ScrumDo, again, I mentioned some support for SAFe, portfolio level Kanban. It might be worth it just for that. Actually, it has some cool integration. So I think you can actually pull in some Jira, and you can definitely pull in Slack. So nice stuff. And also very excited to talk about our next meetup, because there was someone who he wasn't sure he was able to join today. His name is Mike Ackerbauer, and he's going to talk about understanding the keys to breakthrough teams. So I myself went through a little exercise of what kind of thinker am I, and it's basically how the way you think affects the way you work inside of teams, and why you might be better at certain stages of thinking process than another. So that was actually a really cool exercise to go through. So yeah, reach out to coachingagile@gmail.com if you have questions. Of course, we are on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can find all of us and our co-hosts, and you can always visit coachingagilejourneys.com for the previous webinars that we hosted. But we love to have interaction, and so that's why we hope you join live. And I think that I am going to turn it back over to Mark Kilby. So I'm going to stop my share.
All right.
And so yeah, we'll be monitoring the chat and the polls and everything.
All right, I will grab the screen. And hopefully everyone's seen the presentation now, yes? Okay, and that's the last thing I'm going to be able to see your head nods, because once I go into presentation mode, you all become faceless, unfortunately, with our presentation software. So there's a tip for anybody who's looking for the next great app to develop, one that does not take over all your screens. So, all right. So thank you very much, Heidi, for that introduction, and thanks to the whole team for inviting me. I've had the opportunity to work with some of them and some other collaborations, and it's really a great group. Highly recommend even going back and listening to some of the past talks. I've been able to sit in on some of those, and they've just put together a really great series. So kudos to you guys. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about my journey, and also hopefully find out a little bit about yours. For the last several years, I have been working with distributed teams, hence the title, Thriving in Virtual Space, or Virtual Team Space. And why listen to me about this stuff? So these days, I tend to measure my experience in decades. That's kind of painful, but that's the way I have to these days. I'm not showing you the first decade. That's all the bumps and bruises. But starting about the 2001 timeframe was when I got involved in Agile, mostly through DoD contracting, actually, when people said you couldn't do it there. So I'm used to doing things where you're not supposed to. And another interesting thing, as I went from Department of Defense consulting to Agile consulting through Rally and leading Agile, ended up working and consulting across a number of different industries. And another problem I ran into was, as an Agilist, you should always be working face to face. About 90 to 95% of the time, I didn't always have that situation. It was really a luxury for me to have a completely co-located team. And so I just, out of necessity, I had to adapt. I had to make things work. And then another interesting transition happened about 2014, where I decided to come off the road. I was getting a little tired of the road warrior lifestyle, and my family was getting tired of it as well. And so I went back to become a full-time employee, an internal coach for a company called Sonatype. So you may not have heard of Sonatype, but you might have heard of the Maven project if you're familiar with the Java ecosystem. And the interesting thing about Sonatype is they took some of the ideas and the thoughts out of Maven and just continued to build upon them. And that includes not only the software they built, but how they built things, including working distributed. Almost all of them met each other through the open source community. So they said, what if we just kind of build a company this way? So that they started about 2006, 2007 timeframe, I believe. I came on board at 2014 when they were just starting to boot up Agile teams. And 3.5 years later, we have probably, I think, 12, 13, 14 teams. It shifts a little bit, and I'll talk about that. But we have some doing Scrum, some doing Kanban, and all doing this virtually. So I have team members from Thailand to Alaska. So those are my teams. But that's not where I stopped with distributed teams. I've also been doing quite a bit of volunteer work. First as one of the co-founders of Agile Orlando, and then the Agile Florida network of user groups, and then starting the Agile Open Florida Conference, and then helping out with a number of other conferences, all distributed leadership teams. And so some of the things I learned from my work experience, I transferred there, and some of the things I learned from the volunteer experience, I transferred over to work. Where the volunteer side has kind of evolved to is I'm now one of the co-directors of an Agile Alliance initiative called the Community Group Support Network, or initiative. And that initiative helps support other user group leaders around the world. And so some of these same concepts I'm talking to you about tonight not only apply within companies, but really organizations and volunteer groups worldwide. So I hope you find some use from what we'll share tonight. But this is where I want to find out a little bit more about you. So on a separate screen, if you could, go to slido.com. And if you would enter the code CAJ, and I'm going to turn on the first poll. So when you go there, switch over to the polls. And I want you to answer for me, what is your current role? I just want to get a sense of where you're coming from. And so you can see it. If you haven't found it yet, it should look like this. You just jump into the polls there. And you might have multiple roles, so you can pick up to 3. All right, I'm seeing a few answers roll in now. Okay, seen a lot of Scrum Masters and team coaches, some directors, some team members. All right. Waiting for it to settle down here. All right, very good. Okay, so I kind of assumed that would be our mix tonight. So some of the things I'll share will apply mostly to coaches and Scrum Masters, but some also to those who help craft the larger environment, the managers and directors. And so equally important in our distributed agile environment. So thank you for that. All right. So I also want to point out that if you have questions, feel free to flip over to the question side of Slido, add those anytime, and you can upvote or downvote each other's questions. And so I'll take some time to pause throughout the presentation and answer those. Awesome. Thank you for that. So another thing I wanted to reveal is I'm also a bit of a space geek. And so this is why there's sort of a space theme to this conversation. And when you look at distributed teams sometimes you don't see the team. Sometimes you don't see anything terribly out of the ordinary, but you might see some slightly odd things like, why is this guy's foot hooked under this bar? You'll just see odd little things in some distributed teams. In others, you'll see some extremely weird things in distributed teams, and you're going, wow, I don't know how you guys work that way. And so I've seen many different teams, and I tend to classify them in one of three ways. One is the satellite teams, where you have most people at a single location, most of the team perhaps, and you might have one or two people kind of in a work from home situation, or maybe they occasionally work in a quiet space, or maybe not so quiet space, a coffee shop or something, but they'll occasionally separate out from the main team. Another that I see frequently in my past consulting were clusters. So different groups or subgroups spread around in different locations and different time zones. And then used to be more rare, but now becoming more frequent is what I call the nebulas, where everyone is completely dispersed. And so that's where Sonatype is now. We're kind of in that nebula class where everyone works out of their home. So you're seeing my home office behind me, and all of us have a home office set up. And what I find is that can sometimes be the best scenario for distributed agile teams, because we're all having to connect roughly the same way. Okay, so now I'd like you to go back to Slido, and I'm going to fire up the next poll here, because I'd like to find out if you have been in any of these kinds of teams. So you should see a couple of variations on satellite, cluster, nebula, or maybe you're just curious and you want to just listen in if you haven't experienced them. So go ahead and vote and let me know which kind of teams you've been on in the past.
I love the live updates.
Yeah. Oh, seeing kind of an interesting and even mix between satellite and cluster. Okay, a few willing to admit they were the remote person in the satellite. That's always a very tough position. Very good. All right, and just a few who've been in those nebula classes. All right, great. All right, so I'll try to tailor some of my comments more to the satellites and the clusters then. So thank you for that. I'm going to keep that poll up for a while so I can keep an eye on it. Okay. So one of the questions I had promised to ask in the abstract was, how do we help people be successful on distributed teams? And I usually get a number of questions around tools. And it's really not the best place to start. Instead, you really want to focus on principles over practices and tools. And there's a few things that I want to share with you, and this is work that is in collaboration with Johanna Rothman. If you know Johanna, she has written on a number of subjects, and so we decided to collaborate on an upcoming book on distributed agile teams. And so this work is literally hot off the digital press, and so you're seeing it here for the first time. Okay, so what are some of the principles that might help us and help our teams work in a more agile fashion, or just work better in our distributed settings? So the first one is what we like to refer to as pervasive communication. So part of this is the focusing on more message around why certain things need to be accomplished before you specify the what. So if you're familiar with the work of Simon Sinek, for instance, you'll see many things written in the Agile literature about this. But it's even more important with distributed Agile teams to have that focus on why do we need this? Why does the business need this particular approach? And here's what we think we need for that reason. Because it gives the teams the opportunity to focus on what is the larger goal and maybe provide some alternatives. So it might be some slight changes in technology that might suggest, or maybe a completely different path if you can help deliver that why message. The how is more of letting the teams work that out. So with just about, I would say, all of our teams really, we have some very good collaboration between product owners and team members in, excuse me, in a daily fashion. And really, the question of how it gets built is completely up to the teams. Okay, so as experienced Agilists, so this should not be anything new. But what I find in distributed settings is that there'll be an urge to tell people what exactly needs to be done and how to do it. And so I would say back off of that and go back to those Agile principles about focusing on the why and the what. Okay. The other thing about working in distributed environments is you need to be aware that there might be multiple ways to communicate that message, and also multiple learning styles that you have to be aware of. So it's a matter of broadcasting those messages over the right number of channels, and also think about the timing of the messages. So for instance, our senior VP of product is very good about when there's like a new feature or a new challenge or something that he feels like the whole group needs to be aware of, he'll usually start with a blog post. Put the blog post out, even allow for some comments, and then have in his regular all-hands meeting some time to address some of the questions. Even if he's addressed it online, he'll readdress them in the public forum, and also open it up to additional questions so that people can kind of start digesting the message in the new vision. Okay. Now, as an Agile coach or Scrum Master, and if you saw Heidi's presentation about a week or so ago, you will have seen some of these. You'll want to have a few things in your kit to make sure that you can keep a hand on those multiple channels. So one thing I always mention is a back channel. And so this is usually for any kind of meeting. Do we have some sort of chat channel where if somebody can't break in on the audio, they can still break in on chat? Okay. So actually, I have a couple of back channels right now with Heidi and the Coaching Agile Journeys team. We have a Slack connection. Actually, they also have my cell phone, so if something happens with all the digital, the internet connections, they can still reach me there. So I always have some sort of back channel, no matter what meeting is happening, so that people can connect with me as facilitator right now, but also with each other. And I've been seeing messages pop up in the Zoom chat, but because of the size of the audience, I can't respond to those right now, but I will come back to those because I have that back channel to refer to. Okay. Another one, which I tend to use more in satellite kind of teams where I might have a few people remote, is what I refer to as the buddy system. And so if you have a meeting where everyone's in a conference room accept those few remote people, this is where you might want to ask for volunteers and say, hey, can one of you pair with one of the remote people and kind of help monitor that back channel for them? Make sure that they've got the connection, make sure they can break in on the conversation, or at least have their points of view heard through you, if not through the audio or the visual channel. Okay, so that's where the buddy system comes in. Another one is the co-pilot, which that co-pilot model is where I tend to use that with more the cluster group. So if I have different clusters of people, that's where I will try to have a co-pilot helping me to facilitate each location, but also connected to me through a back channel or maybe other means so that we can coordinate quickly. This works great for large retrospectives, by the way. All right. So another thing that, another principle that we're starting to recognize is the assumption of good intent, or another way to characterize this is trust. So not to go too much further in this, there's actually another presentation I did earlier this year for a different group, but Isaac has seen that, and there's a link here to that presentation. But there's actually quite a bit of new research on trust and actually the financial impact that trust can have, and how as an organization, there's some things you can do within your organization to foster trust and actually build a better bottom line as part of that. But there's also some things within your team that you can focus on. So even if you're not a manager or director who can help shape the environment that the team is in, there's still some things within the team that you could focus on, and that's helping them to understand their natural tendencies. So some of you are probably familiar with things like the MBTI or DISC assessments. Our coaching staff at Sonatype, we lean more towards Strength Finder. We like that as a way to kind of understand each other's natural tendencies and where we tend to lean in on certain kinds of initiatives. But sometimes this can be a little bit heavy for a team, and it can take a long time to introduce, and it may take a long time to get adoption. And so this is where we've gone to kind of simpler approaches, more of a DIY approach. And one is this compass exercise, which I'll make that available in the references. We actually got this from another site that had it written up as a co-located exercise. We just adapted it for our teams. But roughly how it works is you present the teams with a compass somewhat like this, and you ask them to place their icon or their avatar next to that compass point that is closest to where they tend to think or how they tend to act. So if they focus more on action, then they're in the north. Or if they are more toward caring and making sure everyone's inclusive, which is where I tend to be, then they're more toward the south. We've used this for a number of our teams as a very simple exercise. You can usually do it in an hour, sometimes less, but it results in sort of a common understanding, but also a common language. You'll hear people say, "Oh, I understand why you said that, Barry, because of your Southern tendencies. Okay, I got that. I see where you're coming from." So we actually hear those kind of conversations in our teams. Also, some of you as coaches might be familiar with Liftoffs, the book by Diana Larson and Ainsley Nees. It's now in its second edition. We've done some of those distributed. I will say with distributed teams, it tends to take a little longer, and it becomes very involved. There are some other options for you. So I'll have a reference to another online platform called Prelude. It is, again, it is a tool, but what I like about this tool is it really helps the teams understand each other, but also go a little bit beyond that and develop a shared vision and some working agreements. So very, very interesting tool, probably worth a look at. I don't get anything from that. I just say it's an interesting one for what you need to achieve to understand each other's tendencies. Another one which should be familiar to our Agilists is the concept of rhythm, but it's super important for distributed teams. This is how you can set expectations with how the team needs to collaborate. So whether you're doing something more time-boxed like Scrum or XP, or something more flow-based like Kanban, it's still important to have a rhythm, and it's important for the team to decide what that rhythm is. Okay, so how, as you kind of set up initial chartering exercises, how do they feel the rhythm of the team should be set? And check in on that through retrospectives. A fourth principle is what we like to call adaptability and resilience. So there's a few ways to look at this, but one is, can individuals quickly adjust to meet a goal? So can they think of a few options when they're blocked? Or can the teams themselves adjust to meet a particular goal? And how can the organization itself work through ways to adjust, okay, rather than stick to a long-term plan? Sounds very simple, but it's a matter of putting certain structures or actually certain expectations in place that they have the power to make adjustments. So this gets back to letting the teams decide on how they approach things so that they can also determine how they can adjust, okay? More so when the team hits problems. So if you have a team member that might have a medical issue, and maybe they have some unique expertise, how does the team work around that? Is the team set up to solve that problem themselves, or do they need some outside assistance? And how much of the organization can provide that? So let me give you some examples there. So one example is around communication tools. So one might be, how many communication tools are available to your team, and which is the primary one for that team and which are backups. So most of our teams have a primary communication tool. It may not be the same primary tool for each team. The team decides that. And they might have 2 or 3 different backups in case there's a problem that day with that tool. So they can quickly adapt and shift over to another tool for whatever work they need to accomplish. And the other key is, can anyone fire up that tool? Not a Scrum Master, not a coach. Can anyone on the team do that? Also, around facilitation, is your organization set up that anyone on the team can facilitate any ceremony, or are you always dependent on the product owner to run planning or the coach to run a retrospective? So again, this is an example of adaptability and resilience. So to be adaptive as well, I'm going to flip over to Slido and see what questions we have. Isaac, I know you were kind of taking a look at this. Were there any questions kind of popped to the top for you?
Yes, and in fact, we got a couple that upvoted. We had 4 upvotes on one of them, specifically around how do you best facilitate time differences between far distributed team members. That got 4 upvotes, and so it seemed like that hit home with some people. Okay,
I am about, I think, 2 or 3 slides from answering that, so I'm going to hold on that one. So let me pause on that, because I think we're going to get into some really meaty stuff about that. What's another one?
Perfect. Another one that got some upvotes was, have you found a great whiteboarding tool for distributed teams? We're going to hit that in a few slides too.
No, I am going to punt on that one. So I will say the whiteboarding tool is probably right now the holy grail for distributed teams. That is the one tool that we really wish we had a good answer for. We are always evaluating new whiteboarding tools. It has really been a struggle for us. So we have solved that a different way, which I'll come into in just a minute. Okay, so thank you for those 2. Let me flip back to the presentation, since one of those questions was directly related. Thank you, Isaac. I appreciate you vetting those. Okay, Isaac being my other co-pilot there today. All right, so, okay, we're going to hit on this next principle. So another principle is what we like to call pervasive collaboration. So one of the things that we often find is with distributed teams, you'll get team members that will come online and say, oh, this is great. I can now just sit and focus at my laptop. And I'm hoping you're seeing me on screen being completely ignorant of the camera, because that's kind of what some will do. It's not to be standoffish, but in some office environments, it can be very noisy. It can be very hard to get into deep focus. So there's that tendency when you're working distributed, oh, now I can really solve problems the way I like to solve them. However, we try, even from the first moment of onboarding to somebody, to say, okay, you'll have that time, but keep in mind that the more you collaborate with your team, the more likely you're going to explore problems faster and solutions faster. Okay, so with that, Johanna and I have been discussing what are sort of the boundaries of that. So this is getting to that question that was asked about facilitating. So right now we're seeing a couple of different axes, if you will, of the collaboration space. I'm not sure these days, with the way technology supports us, that physical distance is as much of a problem as it used to be. With that, I think time zones and time zone differences might not be the right way to think about it. Instead, think about what are the hours of overlap that you can have on your team. So let me say a little bit more about that before you throw the crazy flag at me. So for us, what we have tended to do is go to very small teams. So we have teams right now of 3 to, I think our largest development team right now is 6 people. Okay, and that's deliberate. One, it's easier to coordinate schedules, but it's also easier for the team to communicate with each other. One of those teams, and I mentioned I had one person in Thailand, that person in Thailand, his team members are in Las Vegas and Los Angeles. So a fairly big spread. However, the person in Thailand is a night owl. He likes to work late at night. That's where he feels he's most creative. That's where he has the most energy. So what we find with those teams is if you have a group of individuals, regardless of what time zone they're in, if they feel comfortable with 4 to 5 hours of overlap in their workday, however they define that workday, and this is why you want a small team, then you will typically get the collaboration you need, particularly if you're using Scrum. There's time you need for those Scrum ceremonies. So 4 to 5 hours is really sort of a sweet spot. Going below that, Scrum definitely is not going to work. There are some alternatives to that, but Johanna and I like to say 4 to 5 hours is a good level there. We have observed cases where teams will collaborate for more than 8 hours a day, but how the collaboration happens changes throughout the day. So maybe they are done with the workday and they like hanging out with each other, so they'll start an online gaming session. I've had this happen with some of my teams. So they'll socialize online, or they'll do some other thing. So we had, at Sonatype at one time, we had what we called the Craft Beer Guild. And so there were groups that would get together, a group of people talking about different ways they brewed craft beer. And so with those teams that collaborate beyond 8 hours a day, we find if they're shifting into socialization, that's good. For some, it's shifting into deeper mastery or deeper focus. So we have some that collaborate to open source projects outside of their work time, which is okay, but we try to watch for sustainable pace in those cases. So that's one example. Another one is I want to have you notice this vertical axis, what right now we're calling nomadal. I can't say it right now. Nomadality. There we go. In other words, how often does somebody change their location? So this has been made popular in the last couple of years with the mention of digital nomads who tend to move from place to place as they work. We have a few at Sonatype, but it's actually not that new of a concept when you think of people who work at home a few times a month. It's a very similar concept. So with that, what we find is collaboration can still work with these folks as long as they're not changing locations more than once or twice a day. We have some people that do that. It gets a little disruptive when you go past that boundary. when you get to the point of somebody working at home perhaps one day a week, then you need to start thinking about some different working agreements around something like, if one person is remote, we should all tend to work like we are remote, even if you're in the office, so that there's an equal playing field for all people. Excuse me. And again, for the true digital nomads who are country hopping or time zone hopping, if they're changing locations and time zones frequently, then you've got to watch out for travel time, and you might have some working agreements with them, or even some policies around, okay, if you're doing this, then you might be doing it on your own time, or something like that. So there's lots of variations that maybe we could talk about here in Q&A. So another two more principles I want to hit, because I know we're getting close on time, is one is continuous improvement. So this should seem obvious for somebody who's an Agile practitioner, but there's really some things you can do as an organization to make this easier for the individual as well as the team. So as change leaders, and when I say change leaders, it might be Scrum Master, it might be a coach, it might be a product owner who is very passionate about Agile product management. As you're trying to instill some change in the organization, the best thing you can do is to model that change first, then focus on your team. And as part of that, how can you do it? By incorporating rhythm as part of it. So one of the things we did at Sonatype, as we talked about some of our past experiments and how we might want to incorporate some broader innovation and broader continuous improvement, as well as some individual improvement, we took the hackathon concept, we refer to it as improvement days, and really said, this is for the individual to improve themselves. They can pick whatever they want to improve. So it might be picking up a book. It might be fixing that bug that's been on the bottom of the team's backlog, but it's just bugging them to no end. Or it might be, hey, it'd be really cool if I could collaborate with some folks on this other team. I have an idea I want to try. We may not get it done in a day, but I just want to collaborate with somebody in this other product group and see if we can maybe build a new integration. We've actually had some new features produced that way. And we do this improvement day every 2 weeks. So it happens actually every sprint for us now. Another part of the personal side of it is we also have provided some one-on-one mentoring. So some of our coaches have worked in more of a one-on-one setting. And so as part of that, we offer some personal coaching on a variety of topics. And so this is allowing the individual to look at career path or kind of a broader picture of where they're trying to go and how they might look for new assignments within Sonatype, maybe some new skills, and just kind of bounce ideas off each other. And we're actually going to be broadening this program here very soon. And then, of course, the team level, you've got retrospectives, you've got training. And another thing that I find more of the fully distributed companies are doing are regular meetups where you bring everybody face to face. So once a year, we actually bring the entire product group face to face. The last time we did it was this past May. We had about 95 people. So it was the product group along with some marketing and sales folks, sales engineers as well. And we ran it all using open space. So the group that showed up set the agenda. We did not preset an agenda for this. We let them come in with what are their current issues, who did they need to reach out and talk to, and we encouraged them to talk to some of those folks before they got on site, but they really set the agenda. So the group that showed up, they had the control over how they ran that meeting. And we've been doing this for 3 years now, and it's been one of the most popular gatherings, so much so that we're now starting to do this for teams and groups of teams that are collaborating on larger features and integrations. And so now people within our organization will likely be involved in 2 such meetups, one with the whole product group and possibly one with their team or a subset of teams based on whatever new initiatives they might be tackling. So this allows them to not only learn more about their team, but other people in the organization, which has all kinds of other benefits. Last one, and then I'll hit a couple other quick topics and we'll get into questions. But this last one is just as important. Actually, all these are equally important. And sometimes we actually lead with this when we bring people on board at Sonatype. But it's really transparency at all levels. So for us, a team room is for the team, but really anybody is within the organization is open to come in and ask questions of the team. So for us, the team space is our Jira board and our main team chat channel. There might be some sub-channels based on particular stories and initiatives, but there's always a main team channel where the team is coordinating on different things and others can come into the team space, ask questions, or just kind of listen in on certain meetings, because that's also the back channel for the team meetings. As we bring new people on board, even if they've worked at other distributed organizations, we found they get a little nervous with this setup and they want to directly call somebody or directly message somebody in chat to ask questions. Instead, we take them right back into that public channel and say, please ask your question in the public channel. Don't worry about it being a dumb question. Don't worry, we are all here to help you. Because what we have found is if somebody new asks that question in a public channel, they'll usually get a few different responses. Sometimes it'll be responses that others on the team who've been there for a while had not thought of or were not aware of. And so you actually end up educating the entire team when those kinds of questions are asked. Another thing that we try to share publicly, both asynchronously through chat and email, but also in meetings, particularly retrospectives, is public appreciations. And in some cases, even mea culpas, or oops, I'm sorry, I messed up. So this is where I really have to give a nod to our senior VP at Sonatype, Mike Hansen. When he models this, when something didn't quite get communicated the way it should have, he will be the first one to say, you know what, that was on me. I apologize to you guys. Here's how I'm going to fix it. And so he makes that very visible. And with that model, all the other leadership within the organization will take that approach. Okay. Along with transparency in those levels, it's also important to try to build cross connections. So when people onboard, we encourage them to do one-on-ones with everybody on the team and even some people outside the team that they might interact with on a semi-regular basis. We'll do lean coffees where anybody can come with any kind of question and get those answered. I talked a little bit about the guilds. We have various kinds of open lounges. Some are in chat, some are live. So people can just come in and meet people from across the company. And I also talked about the meetups as well. And so these are different ways that we try to make parts of the distributed organization very open, and help people become aware of what else is happening in the organization. All right, so I can go on to talk about hiring as well as, is it right for you? But I know we said 45 minutes for the talk, so I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to ask Isaac and Heidi, do you guys want to just move into questions now, or do you want me to hit those other topics?
Well, I know we have a few good questions, and the additional topics sound interesting too. Heidi, what are your thoughts?
So I'd love to bias towards answering some of the other questions that haven't been answered yet, and then
Okay.
if we have time, we can hop back because we do have, about 15 more minutes. So
Okay.
maybe we can just do it all.
All right, let's see if we can. All right, Isaac, do you have another question that looks interesting?
I sure do. So here's one that also got some upvotes that said, how do you feel you best best communicate a product owner's vision to a distributed team? Documentation, regular meetings, something else?
D, all the above, and then some. So at some type in particular, there's a number of things that we've experimented with. Also, my prior consulting roles, I found that pervasive communication I talked about, being able to communicate in multiple channels. So let me give the sonotype example. So on many of the teams, a team is exposed to a new feature or epic probably about 3 times before they actually work on it. So usually the product owner will bring it in a really a raw state and say, hey, here's kind of this new feature that's coming. This is what I'm hearing from the stakeholders, the internal stakeholders and some customers. Team, can you kind of give me a sense of what challenges you might see, or is it fairly straightforward, and how might you break this up? And so there'll usually be a conversation. It happens as part of the regular grooming or backlog refinement, following the Scrum Guide, if you want. And so they'll have that conversation, and then the product owner will take that back. He or she might do that story split, or might ask for some of the team members to say, hey, can you guys help me with that? But if there's a lot of confusion, they'll take it back to the stakeholders. Second time around, the product owner will come back with the set of stories, some of which were probably suggested by the team, and take another pass through. So they'll kind of go through that next layer and get some refinement on what are some of the acceptance criteria. And we're doing this all in Jira through like a Zoom call. We actually use Join Me, but very similar. And then the third time around is where they actually pull in the planning and they look at, okay, what stories are we actually going to pull in? Do we think we can sequence this over the next few sprints? And so that conversation will also take place, and they've now had a chance to digest the new feature. When it involves multiple teams, there's a little bit more to it. So we'll actually have more of a kickoff meeting between some of the team members. We may decide at the time, do we need everybody involved? Do we need just some key people involved? And we'll kind of do that epic walkthrough with that larger group, and then figure out, okay, what parts need to go to which teams, and we'll kind of split the backlog there, and then do those other cycles with the individual teams. And excuse me, figure out, do we need to start building some feedback loops between the teams, and what do those look like? So and so we kind of craft that right now feature to feature. We're not at a size where we have to do anything like safe or less, but those are things we're looking at as we continue to grow. So hopefully that answered the question.
Excellent. That's a good answer. Thank you. So another question I have here is, for virtual teams, how important do you feel real-time communication is? Where would you recommend to make sure a team uses it versus, say, something that's asynchronous? And why would you really recommend this one needs to be in real time versus recording or asynchronous communication?
So again, with the pervasive communication and also excuse me, synchronous, you want to look again at how much overlap the team has per day. Again, this is why we like the tiny teams. It's a lot easier to get that overlap with those tiny teams. And if they're, and I'm hoping people are familiar with the concept of T-shaped people. So there might be some broad skills, but there's some depth by certain individuals, so hence the T. So with that, you've got enough T-shaped people so that they can figure out when they need to come together, especially if there's maybe a major architecture change or a major shift. Okay, that's the time we might need to come together and really haggle through a design or what that change is, what are the implications, and then figure out who needs to split off asynchronously and maybe dive a little deeper. Do they need to pair up with somebody as part of that, and do they need more of that collaboration time? Or can they just go solo and come back to the team maybe, and usually it's the next day or two. Sometimes it's a little bit longer depending on what the particular feature or change is. So what we like to have is this 4 to 5 hours of overlap time, so they have that option of coming together every day.
Okay.
They may not use it, but if you have that option, the teams will use it at least a couple times a week, in my experience.
And just to clarify, you would allow the teams to be the ones kind of driving that. These are the people who need to pair off versus, or would you look to help organize that?
Well, if they're well, so I'll give the consultant answer. It depends. So most of the time, the teams will work that out on their own. And again, if the teams have control over the communication tools, they don't need me as a coach. They don't need the product owner who has the keys to the sacred communication tool. You know, they can fire up whatever they need to fire up to have that collaboration. But if it's more of a, hey, I've got too much work in progress, she has too much work in progress, he has too much work in progress, then we've got a different conversation. It's not how do we make this change? It's like, how do we get anything into the pipeline? What do we need to drop? And that's where we need to get like the product owner involved as part of that conversation.
Excellent. Okay, let me give you one more and then we can move on. Here's another one that's interesting. As a new manager, how can I switch things up when the rhythm that has been established seems to bore people? So you're talking about rhythms. So this is where you're trying to establish a rhythm, but the team is disengaging from that rhythm. What would you recommend for that?
So one approach, and you might try something different, but one thing that's always worked for me is when I come in to a new team, one of the first things I do is I'll have a one-on-one with each person, and I'll just find out a little bit about them, and I'll find out what's working and what's really bugging them about things in general. It may not be about the team, it might be about the company. But when I came on board for one of the teams, one of the big things they said was, and I got this almost from every person, is, oh my gosh, our meetings take too long. I said, really? That's the big problem? I said, okay. So my goal over the next 6 weeks was to try to get meetings as short as possible. So the thing that they heard from me was, oh, I'm sorry, guys, we're done 15 minutes early. I hope you'll forgive me. See ya. And after a while, they went, that was cool. We like that. So the best thing you can do is talk to your team. Find out what is it that's not working about that rhythm. If they don't feel safe about bringing it up in a retrospective, then you've got even a different conversation. So find a safe way to have that one-on-one conversation and figure out, one, how to make the retrospective safe, and two, how can you make that change in the rhythm on their behalf if they don't feel they can do it. Okay, but if I can nudge it more toward the team to make that change, I'd prefer to do that. Another thing I'll add is around the safety is, because we have very public team rooms, one of the things I will do is set up private retrospective channels in our chat tool. And I tell team members, you guys can put anything here. If we may not wait for a retrospective if you feel it's urgent, we might just talk about it right there in chat, but we'll also queue topics up that way. And they don't have to worry about everybody in the company saying, oh, you know, this other team's driving me nuts. They still have a way to kind of vent if they need to vent. So hopefully that helps.
Excellent. That's a great answer. So I think we'll go ahead and we've got 7 minutes left before we want to wrap this up. You want to see if you can maybe cover one of your topics in the last?
Yeah, sure. So I won't go to full screen so I can actually see some of you. Okay, so excuse me. So one of the things around resiliency is I'm fighting a cold, and through this format, I don't have to worry about infecting the rest of you. So that's another thing about being resilient online. Okay, yes. So one of the things that we found early on that was important is, even when you're recruiting, it's important to instill those principles. So that's part of the training process for us, is recruiting. So even if you're not coming on board, you're going to hear a lot about how we operate. You're going to hear more details than what I shared, because we want you to fully understand it is a different environment, and we want you to be aware of what you're getting into, especially if you only work from home like twice a month. You're going to be in for a little bit of a culture shock going daily. And some people adjust well, some don't. So as part of that, the question I like to ask, and I'll just kind of put it out here, is who do you think typically drives the hiring process on distributed teams? I'll let you think on that one.
Should we answer out loud?
Sure.
I think it should be the team, but I see lots of times it's not driven by the team.
Yeah, it kind of sounds almost like a trick question.
Yes.
So my answer is everyone. So when we have found you really need to get sometimes multiple teams involved. Certainly there's always a hiring manager. Somebody's responsible for this person. They may not be physically writing the check, but they're the ones that are going to be doing reviews and things like that. So you've got to get that person intimately involved. You've got HR, you might have a recruiting, so you've got a team of people. And so for us, it's kind of like mission control. So every person that comes in, we're monitoring kind of how things are going with them. And so as part of that, we tend to look for things. We have a dedicated recruiting channel. So as candidates come through and each of us are talking to them, we won't talk necessarily details about the candidate. We'll kind of pose open questions about what we're observing. And we don't talk about the candidate because we don't want to bias each other in the interviews. So that's been a standing rule is, we want everyone to come in as if they just met the person. We don't want to load you up with opinions from other people. But as part of that, some of the things we look for is, we let the interviewee schedule the interviews with the interview team. So we say, here's the people, here's their contact information. We're going to leave it up to you because if you come in as a team member, this is exactly what you're going to have to do. So we want to see how you handle it. So can you collaborate with a team of your peers to set up a meeting or a series of meetings? Can you adapt to their different schedules? And can we tell if you adapt from one interview to the next? So while we won't talk to each other while we're interviewing, we will talk once all the interviews are done, and we'll say, oh, I asked that question here. How did that person respond when you asked it? And if we don't see much change, say, oh, interesting. They may not have decided to look that question up. That's kind of interesting. So that will prompt a response from the interview team. Also, is there a rhythm to their communication? So we've had some, and this always puzzles us, where they'll get the list of people and they'll schedule with the first person on the list and then wait and wait and wait. And you're like, okay. So they may not understand rhythm. And then lastly, are they transparent with their work history and why they are interested in us? So, and that transparency, we try to be very transparent with the candidates, and we hope they're reciprocal. And I know there's some people that didn't, they kind of put themselves in the other category. So if you're not currently on a distributed team, or maybe you just got on a distributed team, you're going, oh my gosh, why am I here? And you're struggling, hopefully not. And you're wondering, is this right for you? The first question I would ask is, did you have a choice? So we make it very clear, anybody that comes on our team, we make it very aware of what the environment is they're coming into, because we want them to be comfortable in this environment. We don't want them to go through culture shock. And so we talk a lot about working remotely and getting them ready for that. And there's actually quite a bit in the onboarding backlog around getting them accustomed to that. So just like, NASA preps their astronauts, we prep our people for working in virtual space. We don't just throw them out without a spacesuit. And also we talk a lot about these principles as we do the onboarding. So, are you able to work with these principles? Do you see these with your team? Or if you're maybe interviewing with another company, not that anybody's doing that right now, but I've had people come on these talks with that intent. Think about, are you seeing evidence of these principles with that remote or distributed company? And if there's something that you go, I'm not really seeing that, ask them about it. Ask them about some of the things I talked about. All right, so with that, let me wrap up. So, like I said, some distributed teams can be a little odd, or you might get distracted by their shiny new tools and the weird stuff they're doing, like landing on a barge out in the middle of the ocean. Don't worry about that stuff. Really, what's important is look at those principles and also the principles that are important for your team. You might discover some others. That's what's going to get you and your team and your organization on the right course. So, so I'm going to leave it there, and I'll let you guys do whatever you need to do to wrap up. Thank you for everybody who were my co-pilots today, Heidi and Isaac in particular. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So we're right at time. So I'm not going to redisplay my screen, but I will encourage you to join our next meetup, which is November 14th, and it's with Mike Ackerbauer. So please go to coachingagilejourneys.com and register for that. It's going to be a great meetup, and it's going to be related to this one because it's how we think and how that relates to the way we work in teams. So yeah, thank you so much, Mark, for that, and hopefully you can join us for our next talk too.
Cool.
Awesome. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. I look forward to seeing you at the next meetup.
Thank you, everybody.